Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Once again, this is Brad Powers filling in for Todd and Payne as we continue our preview of the Group of Five conferences. Todd and Payne will be with us in just a few short weeks as we begin the Power Four conference previews. But we still got a couple of conferences to preview as far as the G5 goes. And today, none other than the Sun Belt, a much improved conference compared to where this conference was just 10, 15 years ago. Heading towards maybe being the best Group of Five conference down the stretch here. I would still give that to the American at this point, but Sunbelt's got a lot of loaded teams, and they're serious about winning. We've seen Troy obviously take home the crown each of the last 2 years, but there's a lot of transition at the top of the conference from teams like Troy and obviously South Alabama and James Madison, who arguably didn't make the Sun Belt championship game the last 2 years, but you can make a case that they might have been the best team in the conference, just couldn't qualify due to some outrageous outdated NCAA rules as they transitioned over from the FCS. But let's not beat around the bush here. We got 14 teams to discuss today. You guys should know the drill by now. We'll start from worst and work our way up to first. So worst to first here. We'll start at the bottom of my power rankings, and then, of course, at the end of the podcast, we will turn back around and identify what we perceive to be a best bet from this conference today. So best bet at the end of the podcast. Let's start off, though, with a team with a new coach. UL Monroe, the Warhawks, last year started off 2-0, but lost their last 10 games. I will say they were competitive in a few games, especially against two of the better teams in the conference, Texas State and App State. They lost by a point each. But after the 10 straight losses, they let go of Terry Bowden. This was a legitimately bad team. I mean, this was a team that was number 130 in yards per game margin, number 132 in scoring margin out of 133 teams. Defense really struggled, gave up nearly 450 yards per game, 35 points per game. So insert new head coach, Bryant Vincent. He comes over from New Mexico where he was the OC. He was an interim UAB head coach a couple years ago, went 7-6. Offense coordinator is the side of the ball where his forte is, and he's going to serve as his own offensive coordinator here. Lots of ties to UAB and South Alabama for him for the last decade plus, so he's familiar with the region. New defensive coordinator for UL Monroe is Ernest Hill. He was a longtime high school defensive coordinator. Most recently coached the secondary at UAB. So we'll see. I like that staff to be filled out a little bit better, in my opinion, but obviously UL Monroe, when it comes to, if we're stack ranking, programs as far as how much money they got, UL Monroe certainly, we're talking about a program that be in the bottom 10 consistently on a year in and year out basis. Let's talk production or lack thereof when it comes to UL Monroe this year. Bottom 5 in the country in returning production. 11 starters transferred out of the program here since the end of last season. Top 2 quarterbacks departed from last year. Must not have liked what they saw at quarterback during the spring, because post-spring, UL Monroe went out and got an Oklahoma transfer. You know the name well. If you're following the podcast the last couple of years, General Booty comes in from Oklahoma. He's going to compete for the job, might be the favorite for the job at this point. North Texas transfer, Reese Mooney. He also comes in post-spring, so we'll see how the quarterback situation shakes out. Certainly got more questions than answers coming out of spring. One of the few answers that they have is leading rusher Hunter Smith does return. He ran for over 500 yards last year. Receiving position has been decimated. Their top 6 receivers are all gone. 3 of them transferred out. Tyrone Howell was a kid that I thought that was maybe their best player on offense last year. He departs. 4 offensive line starters transferred. Elijah Fisher at left guard's the only guy coming back. They do like a transfer out of New Mexico and Devon Smith. He'll probably start. Obviously has familiarity coming with Vincent over from New Mexico as far as knowing the offense. On defense, more bad news. They had a legitimate first-team All-Sun Belt guy at nose tackle. Aiden Huntington, by far the best player probably on the team. 8.5 sacks last year, 16 tackles for loss. Post-spring, hits the portal, transfers to Tulane. Big pickup for Tulane there late in the process, but a big loss for UL Monroe. They also lose another good edge rusher in Snyder, 14.5 tackles for loss last year. He heads to Iowa State. Their top three guys as far as returning on defense, Carl Glass, Carlin Vigors, Jalen Ware would be the top three guys, all of them 50-plus tackles from a year ago. They also got some experience in the secondary with their cornerback Gotze coming back. He picked off 3 passes a year ago. There's a little bit more to work with than the offense, so we'll see. Obviously, a lot of room to improve when it was one of the worst defenses in the country last year. Another positive, this Jaden Hamlin kid on the defensive line. It is UL Monroe's first 4-star recruit ever. He was out of the JUCO ranks. He was a JUCO All-American last year. He's 6'5", Jaden Hamlin, 315 pounds. I think he starts from the get-go. So keep that name in your back pocket, Jaden Hamlin, the first 4-star recruit in modern UL Monroe history. Let's talk schedule, and let's see if we can get some wins for this team. They're going to be a favorite in the opener against Jackson State. And then right now, my projections have UL Monroe an underdog in the remaining 11 games. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily equate to 1-11, but you spin in the projected point spreads. You come out with a win percentage for each game. I got them right around 2-10 this year, so it's not going to be a banner year for UL Monroe. And keep in mind, folks, this is a program only one bowl game since they joined the FBS in 1994. 30 years, one bowl game. A lot of work to do for Vincent, the new head coach, and probably going to be at least a multiple-year rebuild here. Let's move our way to coach is probably going to be on the hot seat when it's all said and done this year. Even though I think he's a pretty decent coach, he hasn't had great injury luck the last couple of years. Southern Miss is the next team. It is year 4 for Will Hall. Proud tradition at Southern Miss. They've gotten rid of coaches that have had winning records. Will Hall so far just 13-24. 2 new coordinators. Chip Long comes in. He's been a long-time offensive coordinator, but I'm not a huge fan of him. He's bounced around as of late, just a couple of one-year stints at Tulane and Georgia Tech. I kind of parted ways with him at Notre Dame a few years ago. Didn't get along with Ian Book. There were some issues there. Clay Bignell, speaking of Notre Dame, was the defensive coordinator at Eastern Illinois last year, but he was also on that Notre Dame staff with Chip Long a few years back under Brian Kelly, so he's the new defensive coordinator. And speaking of defense, it was extremely poor for Southern Miss last year. They were number 131 in the country in yards per play allowed. They allowed 36 points per game. That was number 128 in the country. So a really bad defense. Bignell's got his work cut out for him. I mean, generally speaking, Southern Miss was a bad team. I mean, they were number 132 in yards per play margin, so second to dead last there. Number 115 in yards per game margin. Number 125 in scoring margin. A legitimately bad team. I will say on the positive side, I didn't think they quit on the season from what I saw in the last few games down the stretch. They did sign their best recruiting class in the Sun Belt, and despite a bad record. They got 12 transfers from Power 4 schools, led by a quarterback, Tate Rodemaker from Florida State. Ethan Crawford's also in the mix at quarterback. Obviously, I think Rodemaker will probably have the inside track to start there. So there's a chance they can upgrade at quarterback, even though they lost their starter. They won't be upgrading at running back because Southern Miss loses their all-everything running back, Frank Gore Jr. He's been the top player, arguably, in the program the last few years, so he's gone. Drake Clark looks like the heir apparent at running back. He averaged 5.5 yards per carry last year. They do, unfortunately, lose their top 2 wide receivers. Caston averaged nearly 19 yards per catch. Latrell Jones was another guy kind of flashed on film for me. I do like Mims at wide receiver. He's their top guy coming back, in my opinion. But losing your top 2 guys plus your all-everything running back leaves a little bit of void there as far as the skill positions. Speaking of leaving a little bit of void, offensive line only returns 1 starter. They do bring in a couple of transfer starters. Dante Lucas started at South Alabama. The Conti kid from Eastern Michigan comes in. He started there. So a little bit more experience than what you typically see from a team with only 1 starter back. Let's talk defense, where they struggled last year. Top tackler back is their safety, Dylan Lawrence. They've returned their best pass rusher in Clemens, who had 5.5 sacks a year ago. They really like the experience Southern Miss does on the defensive line, Jalen Williams, Kristen Booth. But what I don't like specifically, and why I've been involved on the win total going under so far, I only see him being favored in 2 or 3 games this year. I think it's probably Will Hall's last year. It kind of reeks a little bit of desperation when you got to turn over the coordinator position, both OC and DC. I want to emphasize this. I don't think he's that bad of a coach, but sometimes it's wrong place, wrong time. So, I don't see 5 wins for Southern Miss, if you get the hint there. I think this is a 4-8 type of team. Let's move along here. As we move along, we're going to another team with some issues here as far as having a new coach, and that is Georgia State. I thought Sean Elliott did a great job at Georgia State. Got Georgia State to a bowl game in 5 of his 7 years, won 4 bowl games. It certainly shocked me last year. Most of their top players are out in the bowl game, traveling across the country to Boise, Idaho, a little different from the kids from Atlanta, and they dominated Utah State, much to the chagrin of my pocketbook in that game. But Sean Elliott left to take an assistant role at South Carolina, not even a coordinator, just a position coach role at South Carolina, and he left a couple of days into spring. They had already practiced a couple of times in spring. He leaves in late February. That's a tough position. Speaking though, last season, I'll double back a little bit there. Georgia State started 6-1, lost their last 5 games of the regular season, but obviously won the bowl game. Statistically, they weren't great. They were 95 in yards per play margin, 92 in yards per game margin, number 85 in scoring margin. Obviously, all negative numbers for a team that finished 7-6. Let's talk new head coach. Flip the script forward. I like the hire that they got, especially since it was so late in the process. Del McGee comes in from Georgia. He's been the running back coach at the Georgia Bulldogs the last 8 years. He's been with Kirby all 8 years. He's very familiar with the state, Del McGee is. He's coached there his entire career, basically. You can even go back to when he was a coach in the high school ranks. He was also a coach at Georgia Southern as far as assistant. So I like the hire, and I also like what he did at the coordinator positions. Jim Chaney is the new OC. He's got nearly 4 decades of coaching experience. He's been the offensive coordinator at 5 different Power 4 programs. Goes back a long time. Hell, he was Drew Brees' offensive coordinator back in the day at Purdue. I know a little long in the tooth, but when you're a new coach, give me a guy with experience, especially when we're talking about getting hired so late in the process. Kevin Shear is the new DC. He also has a ton of experience. So these are guys that have a bunch of Power 4 experience that they got as an OC-DC. So I liked how McGee filled out the staff. Speaking of filling out stuff, they're not done yet, because what I am seeing in the transfer portal is almost every day Georgia State's adding a new transfer. In fact, they've added 18 transfers post-spring. 8 of those 18 players are from Power 4 schools. So this is going to be a team that's going to look entirely different come fall camp compared to what they were in spring camp. Unfortunately, they do lose a lot of production. Darren Granger was a 3-year starter here. I thought last year was his best season. Nearly 70% completion rate, 20 touchdowns, 7 picks, ran for 10 touchdowns and over 700 yards. Major loss there at quarterback. As far as who is going to be the quarterback for this upcoming season, looks like it's going to be between a couple of transfers. Zach Gibson from Georgia Tech. He was prior to Georgia Tech at Akron starting quarterback. He was probably the favorite to win it coming out of spring, but then they went ahead and added a kid from Pitt and Christian Veyer, who was originally at Penn State. So those two will battle it out as far as fall camp. Won't be as good as far as dual threat as Granger was, but there's some talent there coming from a couple of Power 4 kids. I thought last year the best player on offense was their running back, Marcus Carroll. Ran for over 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns. But in today's day and age, hit the portal, went to a Power 4 school. He's off to Missouri. Top wide receiver, Robert Lewis for them. Transferred to Auburn, another SEC school. I will say in the bowl game, a couple of the replacements really flashed. Running back Freddie Brock ran for 276 yards, not for the season. In the bowl game, Freddie Brock ran for 276 yards. Kadarius Thompson at wideout had 117 yards in the bowl game. So those two replacements hit it out of the park. Again, much to my chagrin, because I didn't think they had anything on the roster. Obviously, I was wrong. Talik Williams is also back at wide receiver for him. They bring in a couple transfers. C.J. Beasley at running back from Coastal Carolina, very productive if you watch Coastal Carolina football the last couple of years. Wilkerson, the running back from Colorado, probably got a little bit of a bad rap there. He comes in. I think he's talented, so they'll be okay at running back, in my opinion. Amon Green, a tight end, I like. In fact, rewatching the bowl game, they used some unique blocking schemes, and I know it's a new staff, but I mean, it was really cool. I mean, they'd motion him towards the line of scrimmage, and then you line up between the center and the guard, and they just block. And, obviously it opened some significant holes for Freddie Brock in that game. Speaking of opening holes, some concerns. Only one starting offensive line comes back. Their top guy, Glover, got drafted in the 6th round, so that's a major loss there. Overall, obviously, the offense probably expect to take a pretty sizable step back. As far as the defense, a lot more pieces to work with on defense. So let's talk Justin Abraham at linebacker, 84 tackles last year, 8 tackles for loss. He returns. Kevin Swinn at defensive end. He started his career at Clemson. He had 4 sacks a year ago. He comes back. Their top guy as far as leading the team in interceptions, Gavin Pringle at cornerback, 4 picks last year. He's back. Jeremiah Johnson at safety, 73 tackles. He returns. Henry Bryant on the defensive line had 5.5 tackles for loss. He's back. So for a team that was turning over the roster late in the process, they were able to hold on to quite a bit of guys on defense. They do lose their leading tackler on defense. That Hunter kid at linebacker is pretty good. Let's talk schedule and what I'm expecting. I don't expect a bowl this year, so it'll be one of those rare years they're not in a bowl as far as recent memory here. But I do expect them to be competitive. So I think it's a 4 or 5 win team, which is right around where their win total is. I believe it's 4.5. Haven't been involved over or under there. I will say what's keeping me away, I think I'm going to be a little, depending on how they shake out the transfer portal here, if they continue to add a lot of talented transfers, I want to be optimistic on this team, but the ridiculous schedule that they have. I mean, they have a bye week on September 21st. They play a game. Then they have another bye week on October 5th. Then after that, they play 4 straight road games. Just a terrible schedule set up for them the first half of the season, and that might cost a team that has some depth issues later in the season. Let's keep it moving here. Let's go to Old Dominion, a team that we'll probably talk about multiple times if you get a hint as far as today's podcast goes. Let's talk Ricky Ronnie, the head coach, enters year 5 already. Wow, where has the time gone? Didn't have a team during COVID, though, so remember that. 2 bowl games, 0 winning seasons. In fact, Old Dominion as a program, you take out the 10-3 season in 2016, 10 years for them, 36-62, not great. Remarkably, last year, this team was involved in 11 of their 13 games were decided by 1 possession. They went 6-5 in those games. Great, a pretty solid yards per play margin, 65 for a team that was 6-7, but they're outgained by 44 yards per game. So a little bit misleading stats there. As far as sack margin, they were the worst in the country, minus 43. That's not good. Couldn't get pressure, gave up pressure. The coordinators are back. Seiler's back year 5 as the DC. Decker's back for his second year as the OC. Also back as the quarterback, Grant Wilson. Successful first season, over 2,000 yards passing, 17-8 touchdown interception ratio. He's much more mobile than expected. You're going to see the rushing yards. You're going to be like, he doesn't look like much there. Well, keep in mind he was sacked 50 times. So, I mean, you take out the sack yards. I mean, this ain't the NFL. It gets counted in the rushing stats. He had over 600 yards non-sack rushing yards. So he is pretty mobile at quarterback. However, he's got a lot of weapons that have departed that were around him last year. Their leading rusher, Callaway, is off to Cal. Second leading rusher, Keyshawn Wicks, hit the transfer portal. If you're looking for a name to keep an eye on, Rutgers transfer Aaron Young at running back. I've been impressed with him in his limited action last few years. I kind of like him, so I think he'll be the starter at running back. 2 of their top 4 receivers, Murphy and Harvey, transferred to Arizona and Duke. So, I mean, a lot of talented kids gone. They do return Kelby Williams and Page at wide receivers, so there's a little bit to work with there. Their right tackle transferred to Memphis post-spring. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. The weakness on the entire team last year for Old Dominion was that offensive line. Allowed 62 sacks last year, worst in the country. Let's flip over to defense. I don't have much good news. 5 of their top 6 tacklers, gone. Wayne Matthews and Terry Jones combined for 242 tackles last year. They're gone. 4 of the transfers out of those 5 guys that are gone went to Power 4 programs, so they had some talent on defense last year. They're gone. Lamarian James was a kid at cornerback, really stood out to me. Just around the football in most plays. He's also a playmaker in the return game. He scored 2 touchdowns against Wake. He's off to TCU. Good pickup for the Horned Frogs. On the positive side, Jason Henderson, literally I know a lot of people say tackling machine. He is the tackling machine. I mean, he's the T-1000, Terminator, is when it comes to the tackling in college football. He had 170 last year, 19.5 tackles for loss. He's on pace with 436 career tackles the last 3 years to be the all-time leader in college football history as far as tackles. So, but the problem is he missed spring. He's recovering from an ACL injury. So I'm concerned. Is he going to be 100% healthy? Is he going to be the typical guy that can get 150-plus tackles this year? We'll see, to be determined. The guy I do like up front, Denzel Lowry, he comes back. They like this safety kid from North Texas. I haven't seen him, Patrick Smith-Young. He was one of the North Texas' best players on defense last year, a bad North Texas defense, though. As far as, they got any freshmen that come in and contribute, I don't know. I not a good recruiting class. Which sometimes, if you're reading the tea leaves, if there's some concern about the coach, recruiting usually is the first sign that if it's not going well, then there might be some issues there. The biggest issue for Old Dominion this year is the schedule. They play South Carolina, East Carolina, Virginia Tech, and BG in non-conference. I think all four of those are bowl-caliber teams. They do have East Carolina, Virginia Tech at home, so that's a positive, but keep in mind they beat Virginia Tech at home a couple years ago. I think Virginia Tech will be focused, to say the least there. They play, obviously, Old Dominion, the tougher the division of the Sun Belt. They pull Texas State and Arkansas State from the West. I mean, what I'm getting at is 10 bowl teams on the schedule, plus South Carolina. So I only see them favored in 2 or 3 games this year. I don't see a bowl game. We'll come back to them later. Let's talk Georgia Southern. Let's, since Willie Fritz departed, I found this a little surprising. Georgia Southern, 47-54 the last 8 years, losing record. That doesn't cut it for a program that, going back to their FCS days, been a winner since the early 80s. Haven't been a winner under Clay Helton so far, 12-14, back-to-back 6 and 7 seasons, and they have not finished either season strong. Lost their last 5 games a year ago, were owned at the line of scrimmage late, got outrushed by more than 110 yards per game on average in the last 4. Keep in mind the year prior in 2022, they lost 4 of their last 5 to finish, so kind of a bad taste in their mouth each of the last 2 years. Number 87 in yards per play margin a year ago, 54 in yards per game margin, 73 in points per game margin. That pretty much adds up to a 6 and 7 type of team. Do have a new offensive coordinator this year, Georgia Southern does, Ryan Applin. If you're familiar with that name and heard about him, he's a really good quarterback at Arkansas State over a decade ago, so he's familiar with the conference, and he's been on staff here the last couple of years. Davis Brin, speaking of quarterbacks, he was the quarterback for Georgia Southern last year. He was a liability. Rewatching the games from last year, my goodness, he put Georgia Southern in a lot of bad positions, threw 19 interceptions. Georgia Southern as a team tied with Nebraska for the most turnovers in the country on offense with 31. Not good. Can't win football games consistently with that. On the positive side for Georgia Southern, their top 2 rushers are back. I like Jalen White. I like O.J. Arnold. They combined for 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns a year ago. Their all-time leading rusher, though, Kalen Hood, is gone. But positive side, their next 2 guys, Derwin Burgess and Dalen Cobb, played a lot of football the last couple of years. They combined for over 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. They're back. They like Oklahoma transfer at wide receiver, L.V. Bunkley Shelton. They like an Auburn transfer tight end, Tyler Fromm. He's Jake Fromm's brother, former Georgia quarterback. So there's some weapons there at receiver and running back if they can figure out the quarterback. Speaking of the quarterback, looks like it's going to be J.C. French, who got some experience last year. He's battling Dexter Williams from Indiana. Williams has had a couple of knee surgeries, ACL injuries on both knees, so that's not great. Offensive line loses their top 2 guys. So, I mean, running back, wide receiver, good. Everything else, question marks. Let's flip over to defense. Obviously not overly impressive the last 3 years. They've allowed at least 30 points per game the last 3 years. On the positive side, their best player, Marquess Watson Trent, returns. He had 122 tackles a year ago. Kind of a short, stocky kid if you watch him on film, 5'11", 220. Another kid that stands out as far as frame, Bullard kid at nose tackle. He's 6'1", 340. He'll pop on tape. He's number 57 if you rewatch some Georgia Southern games. A couple of guys on the edge that can get to the they really get to the passer as far as rushing goes. Justin Rhodes at 13 TFLs. Isaac Walker, 8.5 TFLs. So there's some things to work with up front. Top guy in their secondary, gone. Shamar Bartholomew, gone. He had 14 PBUs. So a little hit and miss as far as returning production goes for them. Better than a lot of teams in the Sun Belt, though, when it's all said and done. What's not better than the top teams in the Sun Belt? I don't like the schedule. And I have 9 of their 12 games priced within a touchdown. The majority of those 9 games are in the underdog role. In fact, right now I only have Georgia Southern favored in 3 or 4 games this year. I think it's more likely they miss a bowl than make one. You got a win total of 5.5. Do with that what you may, but I have my doubts on whether Clay Helton gets to a bowl game this year. If that's the case, I don't think he makes it to year 4. Let's keep it going here. Another coach probably a little bit on the hot seat here. That's Charles Huff entering his 4th season for Marshall. Last year, 4-1 in close games. And man, after that, they started the season red hot with a 4-0 is what they started the season, including a win over Virginia Tech. They only won 2 of their last 7 games. I mean, their lowest power rating as far as the season, following it week to week, was at the end of the season. So it wasn't a good look, to say the least, there down the stretch. Stats said they deserved to be a losing team. They were 83 in yards per play margin, 85 in yards per game margin, 96 in scoring margin for Marshall. As far as, what are they going to do to rectify that? They continue to focus a lot on the transfer portal, and to me, I just think that's hit or miss, a boom or bust situation. They signed 30 transfers again, the second best transfer class in the Sun Belt behind Texas State. 18 of those transfers are from Power 4 schools, so a lot of talent. But they also lost 34 players to transfer. But I will say only 4 of those 34 went to Power 4 schools. So you can make a case that, hey, they upgraded the talent, but I think I could have said that the last few years. They got a new offensive coordinator, Seth Deggy. Never been an offensive coordinator before. Marshall's going air raid this year. I mean, that's fine, but, do they have the personnel to run the air raid? I don't know. Let's talk personnel. They lost by far their best player on offense, Ali, at running back, last couple of years. He had over 1,100 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns last year. Good out of the backfield. He had 28 catches, got drafted in the 5th round. I do like the Ethan Payne kid. I think the kid probably most likely to step up, though, is Jordan Houston, a productive player from NC State, transfers in. Let's talk quarterback. Cam Fancher's out. Cole Pennington, Chad's son, got a lot of snaps at the end of last year, but he threw 0 touchdown passes, 6 interceptions, even though he got like 3-4 starts at the end of the last season. That's not good. My guess is it's going to be Wake Forest transfer, Mitch Griffiths, to be the starter. He's battling a Tulsa transfer, Braylon Braxton, along with Cole Pennington. The problem is Griffiths wasn't there in the spring. He arrives now, and, man, to get that going on just a few months, I have my doubts. Let's talk wide receiver. Lose 2 of their top 3 guys. Jaden Harrison was an All-American return man and also their leading receiver. He's off to Notre Dame. They only got 1 starter back on the offensive line. A defense lost pretty much everybody. Defensive ends, Owen Porter, Elijah Alston combined for 26.5 tackles for loss, 11 sacks. They're gone, along with Sam Burton. He had 6.5 sacks. Leading tackler, linebacker Eli Neal. He departs. Steven Dix, 67 tackles. Cornerback Deanna Hill, 10 PBUs. These 2 guys transferred to Arkansas and Miami post-spring. Not good news. Speaking of not good news, their top cornerback, Micah Abraham, got drafted in the 6th round. He had 19 passes defended last year. That's a lot of production gone off of defense. Top guys that are back, Mike Green, I like the defensive end. He had 4.5 sacks. I like the safety, J.J. Roberts. He had 70-plus tackles. But, again, a lot more out the door than through the door, even with a bunch of those transfers. I got a lot of question marks for a team that has not been consistent the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, they beat Notre Dame, lose to BG the next week. I already mentioned it last year, start 4-0. They beat Virginia Tech, who ends up being a really good team, and they only won 2 of their last 7 games. So, to me, it seems like a 6-6 type of season for Marshall. And, again, do with that information with what you may as far as the win total there. Let's talk Coastal Carolina. Tim Beck and the coordinators, they enter their 2nd season. Up and down year 1 for them. They finished on a high note. They had a big upset over San Jose State in the Hawaii Bowl. Not bad statistically. Number 54 in yards per play margin. Number 48 in yards per game margin. Number 53 in scoring margin. Their problem was in the red zone. They only scored 26 touchdowns on 54 drives. Not good. Also not good, 29 players transferred out. I think there's some depth issues as far as this Coastal team. Let's start, though, with the all-time best player in the history of Coastal Carolina football. Doesn't have a long history, but Grayson McCall is that guy. He's gone. Obviously, he's a quarterback. He's off to NC State. But I will say, he didn't play in the last 6 games of last season, so he's been gone for half a year already. Ethan Vasco came in, he had over 120 passes attempted. Looked okay. 7 touchdowns, 1 pick. Very mobile kid. Nearly had 400 rushing yards in limited time. But they did, as far as competition, they brought in a Michigan State transfer, Noah Kim. We'll see who ends up winning that battle there. They'll be okay at quarterback, in my opinion. Obviously, they're not going to match what Grayson McCall was. But, again, Grayson McCall's been banged up a little bit the last couple of years and didn't play the whole half of the end of last season. Leading rusher Braden Bennett returns. I like what I saw from Javen Simpkins in limited action. I was rewatching the Arkansas State game today. He looked pretty good. Unfortunately, the top 2 wide receivers for Coastal, Pinckney and Brown, combined for nearly 1,800 yards last year. They're gone. Top guy in the offensive line, Will McDonald, departs. They do have 3 starters back there. Defense loses their top 3 tacklers, and also their defensive lineman, Michael Mason. He was their top pass rusher. He's gone. But while they lose their top guys, there is a little bit more depth on defense because 11 of their top 15 tacklers do return. A couple guys that stood out to me on tape were in the secondary. This Tobias Fletcher kid, he's number 4 at safety. Really good tackler in the open field. I was watching the Texas State game. And then Matthew McDoom graded out as their top defender. Both of those guys are back. Let's talk schedule. The good news is no game is unwinnable on their schedule. I have 9 games priced within a touchdown. So if they can stay healthy, play clean, find the answer at quarterback, I think it's certainly another bowl bid's in the cards. Are they going to win 9-10 games like they were doing under Jamie Chadwell? No, I don't see that. But I do think Coastal's heading to a bowl game provided they stay healthy. Arkansas State's next up. Butch Jones entering year 4. He's only 11-26, but last year's team was his best team. They got to a bowl game, and obviously they played their best football down the stretch because I had him cooked, fired. After last year's first 2 games, they were outscored Arkansas State 110-3, but rebounded well. Weren't great as far as the stats, though. Number 86 in yards per play margin, 118 in yards per game margin. So a little bit to be desired there. On the positive side, there's a bunch of them. Both coordinators been with him all 4 years. So coaching continuity today is an endangered species. You don't see it too often as far as college football to have coordinators stay with you that long. Arkansas State signed a top 80 recruiting class in 3 straight years. That's good at this level. Speaking of good, Jalen Rayner, their quarterback, kind of a revelation. They found him after the 0-2 start. He was the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year, 17 touchdowns, 7 picks, 5 rushing touchdowns. A little kid, but he can run around, kind of a little jitterbug. I like him. And obviously he performed well as a freshman last year. They also, as an insurance policy, bring in a UCF transfer, Timmy McClain. Texas State quarterback Malik Hornsby, he transfers in, but he's going to play wide receiver, but a dynamic athlete. Top 3 rushers are back. Cross was their lead guy last year, had 7 touchdowns. I thought their best guy, though, regardless of position on offense, was their wideout, Corey Rucker. He averaged nearly 20 yards per catch. Courtney Jackson had a big spring game. He's got production as far as his career. So they got a lot of pieces to work with here. 4 starters back on the offensive line. I will say this. Starting center, Jacob Bayer, and he was their top-graded player on offense on the offensive line, tore his ACL in the spring. He's out. Thomas would be their top guy that's healthy right now, so that was a big loss for them during the spring. Their center, Jacob Bayer, going down with an ACL. Defense, I've been a lot of positive. Defense, not positive. Number 127 in the country, total defense a year ago. Only a few guys stood out to me. The Straker kid, I ended up leaving for the CFL. Tough loss late in the process for him. They also lost their top sack guy, Crawford, to Auburn in the spring. They do return their leading tackler, Thomas at safety. Second leading tackler, linebacker Willikis is back. So I think there's definitely some more good than bad. I've upgraded their power rating, Arkansas State, since the end of last year. This is Butch Jones' best team. It's not an easy schedule. I pretty much have it coming down to the final game as far as whether or not they make a bowl game. I think it's more likely they make a bowl game than not. So, again, do with that information with what you have. But I don't see 8-4 and them making that next step. I think it's a team that's fighting, clawing and scratching for 6-6, like a lot of teams in the Sun Belt, because there's a lot of parity and not much separating these teams. Let's talk South Alabama next up. A team that was much, much better than their record last season. They went 7-6. But listen to these, when you're stack ranking them nationally. Number 15 in the country in yards per play margin. Number 9 in the country in yards per game margin. Number 19 in scoring margin. That reflects a 10-win team, not 7-6. I would argue statistically the last two teams have been their best two in school history. Not a long, obviously, school history, but going back a decade plus, best two teams last 2 years. Unfortunately, Kane Womack left to become Alabama's defensive coordinator. A trend. So not a good trend for the G5 schools. Head coaches leaving to become assistants and coordinators. I think that's going to become more prominent as we continue to have a bigger gap between the haves and have-nots. Let's talk who the new coach is. It's a familiar name, Major Applewhite. You might have heard of him. He was a Texas, I'm aging myself, but a Texas quarterback back in the day. He's been the OC here the last 3 years. Didn't have a good stint in Houston a few years ago. He was fired after only 2 years as a head coach, but he's got some experience. Rob Ezel, he's been the tight ends coach here the last 3 years. He's the new OC, first-time play caller, though, so that concerns me a little bit. The new DC is Will Wyndham. Again, he's been on the staff the last 3 years as a linebackers coach. Again, a first-time coordinator, so got some concerns there, but at least there's some continuity that all three guys at the three most prominent coaching positions have been filled, and they've all been guys on the South Alabama staff the last 3 years. As far as what they have coming back, Carter Bradley, the quarterback last year, he's not coming back. But I will say this, I think they can upgrade at quarterback. Gio Lopez, if you watched him in a few starts last year, I thought he was impressive, including the bowl game. He was the bowl game MVP. I think, again, they can upgrade at quarterback with Gio Lopez. He's the quarterback of the future. Running back LaDamian Webb is gone. He ran for over 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns last year. Again, I liked what I saw from the two backs in the bowl game. Bullock and McReynolds, they ran for over 700 yards combined last year. So, but again, the bowl games, I'm going to get off tangent here for just quickly. They're more like a preview for the upcoming season than they are as far as wrapping up that particular season. And this team, you got an early peek of what they can be this upcoming season, and they killed Eastern Michigan 59-10 with a bunch of starters out, but a bunch of guys that will be starters in 2024 were playing in that game. One guy that wasn't playing, Colin Lacey, a wide receiver, he's off to Louisville, but Pritchett was a guy that was impressive. Jamal Pritchett had nearly 900 yards last year. Tight end DJ Thomas Jones was impressive. Also down the stretch of the season, they also can get back the Spoyson kid, who's one of their top wide receivers in 2022. He was injured last year, so there's a lot of parts there at the skill position on offense. They do lose their top offensive lineman, and their center Reggie Smith is gone. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin's brother, Jaden Voisin, probably their best player back on defense. 70-plus tackles, 4 picks a year ago. I like this kid up front at nose guard, Thomas, graded out really well last year. The biggest questions for me will be on the edge, Wilfon and Jamie Sheriff combined for 24.5 tackles for loss. They're both gone, so we'll see if they can get some pass rush replacements there. They do like at the safety position on defense this Webb kid from Oklahoma State. They think he's going to contribute and be an instant impact player. They signed their best recruiting class ever, so that coaching continuity paid off there by hiring a bunch of guys on staff. I'm expecting, though, as far as the season goes, I think it looks like a 7-5 type of season. I don't think they're as good as last year's team, but the record, at least in the regular season, might be even better because I just got done telling you, last year's team, if you're looking statistically, probably should have been a 9-3, 10-2 regular season team. So, again, step back as far as the stats this year, but maybe not necessarily in the record for South Alabama. A few more teams here. We are really rapid fire here. We got 4 or 5. I keep forgetting there's not 12 teams in the Sun Belt. There's 14. Let's talk another team in a similar spot here with a new coach. Troy, last 2 years, 23-5. Arguably the best back-to-back seasons ever for Troy, winning the Sun Belt both years. Last year was another legit team. Number 10 in the country in yards per play margin, 16 in yards per game margin, 18th in scoring margin. John Sumrall, unfortunately, left for Tulane. Great hire for Tulane, but big loss for Troy. New head coach for Troy, Jared Parker, comes over from Notre Dame. I wasn't impressed with him last year. He was the OC. I will say this. I think he's a rare situation where I think he's a better head coach, a CEO type than X's and O's, so we'll see how he does. The new OC, Sean Reagan, comes over from West Virginia. He's been with Neil Brown the last 5 years. He was a longtime assistant at Troy prior. Keep in mind, Neil Brown was the head coach at Troy prior. Dante Wright, new DC, also comes over from West Virginia. He was the safeties coach there, so a lot of West Virginia vibes there. Parker was at West Virginia prior to being at Notre Dame the last couple of years. A lot of lack of returning production, though. Bottom 5 in the country in returning production. Watson at quarterback, gone. He had a solid season a year ago. Tell me if you've heard this, though. The expected starter at quarterback, Goose Crowder. Where's he from? West Virginia. So a lot of West Virginia flavor on this Troy team. To me, the biggest loss on offense was their running back, Kamani Vidal. I mean, this is a kid that ran for over 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns, got drafted in the 6th round last year. He's gone. Damian Taylor was the backup running back. Got a few carries. He's back. They lost, unfortunately, their top 3 receivers, including, a kid that really stood out on tape last year, Chris Lewis. Unfortunately, had a cancer diagnosis this spring. He's not going to play this year. That's an unexpected loss. On the positive side, their top offensive lineman, their guard, Daniel King, is back. He's a first-team All-Sunbelt type of player. Defense, massive losses. 12 of the top 14 tacklers from a defense that was legit, not only last year, but the last 2 years. They're number 10 in yards per play, number 10 in scoring, 47 sacks. 12 of their top 14 are gone. They had 6 players, Troy, get first or second team all-conference honors. All 6 are gone. Their edge rusher, Solomon Jubinor, TJ Jackson, combined for 29.5 sacks, 43 TFLs, all 3 gone. Solomon won the 5th round of the draft. Top guy in the secondary, that Reddy Stewart kid, he's gone. He had 14 passes defensed last year. Linebacker, to me, would probably be the team strength, at least on defense. I like the Jordan Stringer kid at linebacker. He flashed a little in the bowl game against Duke. They like this Brendan Jackson kid from Gardner-Webb. Man, a lot of losses. With that being said, though, obviously this has been a double-digit win team the last couple of years. They're going to take a step back, but I still think even with a massive downgrade and a power rating, this still feels to me like a bowl team, 7-5 type of team this year on the first year for Jared Parker. A couple more teams left here. Let's go up to Louisiana Lafayette. Some people are extremely high on Louisiana Lafayette this year. I'm not there. It's quite as high on Louisiana Lafayette as the rest of the market, if you catch a hint there. Their head coach, Michael Desimo. You should see how that's spelled, and to get Desimo out of there. He's in year 3. Programs certainly slipped under him. He's 12-14 the last 2 years. Billy Napier's last 3 teams, remember, went 34-5. 34-5 to 12-14. Last I checked, you don't have to be Einstein to figure out. That's a downgrade. Desimo should be on the hot seat. The recruiting class for ULL, again, I said you can read some tea leaves here. It was their worst class in 7 years. Last year's team was probably a little bit better than their record indicated. They're number 35 in yards per play margin, 64 in yards per game margin, 56 in points per game margin. That says more than 6 wins. That says 7.5 wins or so. The problem with them is they can't win close games, and you're thinking, regression, bad luck. I don't know. It could be bad coaching. 2-5 in one possession games last year. 0-4 the year before. 2-9 in close games under a brand new coach. You better figure that out. They lost 3, and here's the thing that concerns me. Well, are they losing close games where they're expected to be the underdog? No, they're losing close games as a touchdown favorite. They lost 3 of them last year. The Southern Miss game, they stopped at the goal line twice with no points. I don't know, bad luck or bad coaching, bad play calling. I'm more on the bad coaching side of things. Let's talk positive, though. Top 20 in the country in returning production. Maybe that's why everyone's high on this Louisiana team. Zion Cristo at quarterback. I thought he was a quarterback of the future. He's gone. He's off to Houston. Chandler Fields and Ben Woolrich, they're back. They got the experience. So we'll see who ends up winning the job there. They lose their top running back, Caboti. But their next three guys are perfectly capable. I like this Elijah Davis kid. I was rewatching the UL Monroe game. True Frost last year. He flashed a little bit. 5 of their top 7 receivers are back. The guy that impressed me, though, was their tight end, Neil Johnson. He's gone. They do have 4 starters back on the offensive line. That Gilly kid probably is a first-team All-Sunbelt type of player at guard. Tackle Nathan Thomas, their top guy, did get drafted by the Cowboys in the 7th round. This has been a Louisiana program that's pumped out, remarkably a bunch of draft picks in the offensive line the last few years. Let's talk defense. They got a new DC. Jim Salgado, longtime stint with the Buffalo Bills. His expertise is the secondary. We'll see how he does. They did unfortunately lose Gant to Houston at linebacker. Players that flashed to me, they got a jack linebacker in Cameron Whitfield that really gets after the quarterback. He had 8 sacks. In the bowl game, Skipper and Jalen Clark. For the season, they combined for 6 interceptions. They made a bunch of plays in the bowl game. Also, KC Osai is back, their leading tackler. The problem I have is I have 8 of the 12 games projected within a touchdown right now. I just got done telling you, long-winded, that they haven't been winning close games. And I think it's more bad coaching than bad luck. So I guess if they get good luck and make some better coaching decisions, maybe I can see 9 wins this year. But right now I have my doubts. I think this is a 7-5, 8-4 type of team. Let's talk James Madison. Tell me if you heard this one before. Team had a great season last year in the Sun Belt, lost their coach. James Madison specifically started last year 10-0. They got College game day on campus. They lose to App State in overtime. The legitimate team, 21 in yards per play margin, 26 in yards per game margin, 14 in scoring margin, 4-1 in close games. I like their coach, Kurt Signetti, but the problem is he's off to Indiana, and he basically took James Madison's program with him when you're talking assistant coaches and key players. So obviously a big-time downgrade as far as the power rating this year for James Madison. On the positive side, I like their new head coach. James Madison went out and hired a really good coach. I love Bob Chesney. He comes over from Holy Cross. Followed me on Twitter the last few years. I've been a big fan. He's been a head coach the last 14 years. He's been a D3, D2, FCS. He's only had 1 losing season. He's won 111 games. He's finished first in the Patriot League each of the last 5 years. He had a 12-1 record 2 years ago. Their only loss was to South Dakota State in the playoffs, and they outplayed South Dakota State the first 25 minutes of that game. Last year, look at it, Holy Cross played Boston College and Army. Lost both games by a combined 6 points. In 2022, they upset Buffalo. So, this guy's not a fluke. He had Holy Cross from the Patriot League, playing FBS teams consistently well. The new OC also comes from with Chesney from Holy Cross. His name is Dean Kennedy. The new DC, Lyle Hemphill. He comes over from Wake Forest and Duke. He's been the DC there the last couple of years. Tell me if you've heard this before. You got a new coach, so what does that add? That adds to being bottom 10 in the country in returning production. 10 starters alone transferred to Indiana. 10. Just to Indiana. And obviously a few others left, like Jordan McLeod ended up leaving for Texas State. They had 10 all Sunbelt players on the first and second teams last year. James Madison did 10 of them, all 10 gone. 0 skill position players return. I mentioned it, McLeod to Texas State. Top 5 rushers gone, top 6 receivers depart. On the positive side, they do bring in 9 transfers from Power 4 programs. Dylan Morris is the favorite to win the job. He's from Washington. Wasn't a big fan of him, though, at Washington. But, man, geez, he was the starting quarterback in the COVID year. 5 years ago. My goodness. 5 seasons, I should say, 4 years. I really like this North Texas transfer running back, I should say, Adeji, and also North Carolina running back George Petway comes in. So I think they're okay at running back. True freshman at wide receiver, this Dylan Williams kid. I was watching a little bit of the spring. He was a standout. All 3 starters, as far as what's back on offense, are all on the offensive line as far as returning experience. Problem is they had trouble down the stretch last year. Only averaged 73 rushing yards per game their last 4 games. So we'll see if they can get that rectified. This was a program. If there was one position group that led this program the last couple of years, it was the defensive line. Last year, 45 sacks, 2.6 yards per carry. It wasn't just one of the best G5 defensive lines last year. It's been one of the best G5 defensive lines I can recall in the last 5 or 6 years. It'd be in my top 2 or 3. Problem is, 44 of those 45 sacks, gone. A lot of transfers. As far as a lot of transfers out of the program, most of them to Indiana. But as far as guys that they like that are transferring in, they like defensive end this Eric O'Neal. He's from Long Island. He was an all-conference guy there. This edge rusher, Summerall from USF. Linebackers Raymond Scott from Fresno. Jacob Dobbs from Holy Cross, who was an FCS All-American. They like these guys. They think they're going to come in and play and start and produce immediately. They do have a couple of returning starters in the secondary, Jacob Thomas, Chauncey Logan. Here's the major positive. I've said a bunch of negative about guys out of the program. The biggest positive for James Madison is the schedule. It's one of the easiest schedules in the Sun Belt. No Troy, South Alabama, Texas State, Louisiana, Arkansas State. They don't play any of those teams. That's arguably the top 5 teams out of the West. They play 0 of them. I could see, even with a massive downgrade in power rating, I could see James Madison being a double-digit favorite in 3 of their non-conference games. They might even be favored for the season in 9 games. So this is a team that's probably 8-4, 7-5 at absolute worst, maybe 9-3 if they catch a couple breaks. They're not going to take as big of a step back as you think because of a very fortunate schedule. 2 more teams as we wrap up here, and then we'll get to the best bet. Let's talk Texas State, a team that I'm super excited about. Why? G.J. Kinney, probably the next hot name when it comes to replacing a Power 4 coach at the end of this season. That'll be the name to know, G.J. Kinney. Second season here, sensational year 1. Upgraded Texas State's power rating last year, 11.5 points from beginning of the season to the end. Top 50 in yards per play margin, number 35 in yards per game margin, 52 in scoring margin. Legit team. Now, they had some inconsistent performances, but still, when you add it all up, that was the best Texas State team since joining the FBS in 2012. Won their first bowl game. They hadn't put in perspective, they hadn't topped 4 wins in any season since 2014. They won 8 last year. I did not see it coming. Offense, it was definitely led by the offense. 15th in the country in total offense, 11 in scoring offense. Do lose T.J. Finley, who was their starting quarterback last year and had a good year. Here's the thing that might not get properly priced. I think they've upgraded a quarterback. They got James Madison's quarterback, Jordan McLeod, just so happened to be the Sun Belt Player of the Year last year. 35 touchdowns, only 10 picks, 68% completion percentage, nearly 37 yards passing, added 8 touchdowns, I should say, on the ground. Really good quarterback. Should fit well in this system. Lots of weapons on offense. Ishmael Mahdi, 4.4 speed, nearly 2,200 all-purpose yards last year. He returns. They add in a couple of running backs from UTEP. 2 kids that really impressed on tape, Hankins and Burgess from UTEP. 1,400 yards rushing combined from those 2 guys. They're coming in. Most of the receivers are back. Joey Hobart and Wilson, they combined for 16 touchdowns. They're back. Unfortunately, Ashton Hawkins, their big play guy at wide receivers off to Baylor. Baylor got a good look at him in the opener when Texas State beat Baylor, one of the biggest upsets of the season. Offensive line has 3 starters back. So, I mean, this is going to be one of the better offenses. Forget the Sun Belt. This will be one of the better offenses at the G5 level. Let's talk defense, though. They got a new defensive coordinator. Dexter McCoyle, he was a safeties coach at Incarnate Word in Texas State, so obviously following along with G.J. Kinney. Defense last year, 40 sacks, but, man, still gave up a ton of points. They gave up number 114 in the country in scoring defense. Lost their top 2 tacklers. That Holloway kid at linebacker really stood out to me on film, including scoring a couple of touchdowns in the bowl game on defensive touchdowns. The guy I like off the edge is Ben Bell kid, really productive, 10 sacks, 16 TFLs. I think not only made their best player on defense, but a top 2-3 defensive player in the entire league. They brought in a UTEP transfer and linebacker starter, James Neal. Max Harris was a starter at UL Monroe last year. We're talking guys that were very productive, 80-plus tackles last year at their respective places. They transfer in. They also have an FCS All-American at defensive end and Stephen Parker that transfers in. Here's the big part. Not only do I like the returning production, and it's a year 2 of a young, exciting staff, the thing I love most is their schedule. There is not a single game that's unwinnable on the schedule. I got them favored in 8 or 9 games. The underdog rolls no greater than 3 points. They get home games in weeks 2 and week 3. UTSA and Arizona State come to San Marcos. I'm here to tell you, those are winnable games. If they can win 1 or 2 of those games, they're in the mix as far as making a run at the playoffs, this Texas State team. That's saying a lot, and what Kinney's done in just a couple years here. So, and you can still find it. Last I checked, it was still available at DraftKings, over 7.5 wins. I think Hard Rock and a few others still have it too, over 7.5 wins. Texas State. That's a good bet. A little bonus there for you guys. And we finally have come to the last team. Familiar name. Got, maybe not the best program the last couple of years, but if we're talking the last 10 years in the Sun Belt, this is the program, and it's got the most coaching stability. It's App State. Sean Clark enters year 5. 35-18 sounds pretty good for just about every program in the Sun Belt. But the prior 5 years, App State was 54-12. So they have taken a step back under Sean Clark. Positive side, both coordinators return. And actually, I thought that gave that program a little bit of a boost last year. Both OCs and DCs gave them a little bit of a jolt, especially down the stretch. This is a team that was number 52 in yards per play margin, 34 in yards per game margin, 43 in scoring margin. Unfortunately, Nate Noel transferred to Missouri. He's their running back. But on the positive side, there's going to be a lot here. Aguilar at quarterback returns. He had a successful first season, nearly 3,800 passing yards, 64%, 33-10 touchdown interception ratio. Was the Sun Belt newcomer of the year. Probably, obviously Jordan McLeod at Texas State will be, the favorite as far as first team preseason all Sun Belt. Aguilar's got to be second team. Kanye Roberts, more touches this year. He had nearly 700 yards at running back last year. A couple of my favorite players on offense, wide receiver Caden Robinson. I like their tight end Eli Wilson. The biggest issue on offense is the O-line. Jack Murphy, right tackle, probably was going to be a first-team All-Sun Belt type of player this year. Unfortunately, died on April the 30th, so a significant loss for App State there. Jack Murphy no longer with us. On the positive side for them as far as returning production and how they're going to try to replace that, 5 Power 4 transfers on the offensive line, so we'll see. And obviously, Sean Clark cut his teeth as an offensive lineman, as an offensive lineman coach, so we'll see if he can get that unit together after that tragedy there at the end of April. On defense, leading tackler Andrew Parker's gone. Lost their top 2 guys in the secondary, E.J. Jackson and Funderburk. But on the positive side, top pass rusher Nate Johnson at linebacker's back. Cornerback Ethan Johnson, safety Jordan Favors, both very productive guys. They're back. Keep an eye on a safety, Miles Farmer. He was originally at Nebraska. He was at Syracuse last year. He was a productive player a couple years ago in Nebraska. They really like him at safety. Let's talk another positive here and why App State, I'm finishing up as far as the Sun Belt preview with them and why I think they're the top team in the league as far as the power rating goes. Schedule. You take that good power rating on App State, you put it in the schedule, they're going to be favored in probably 10 or 11 games this year. Exception would be Clemson in week 2. The game on the schedule, though, is a home date against Liberty. That might be the most important Group of 5 game this year because, App State's a Sun Belt favorite. Liberty's the Conference USA favorite. The winner of that game is going to be right there in the mix to get that all-important playoff berth. So that's a big game there, and obviously Boone, North Carolina is a tough place to play. So App State's won. I expect them to play Texas State as far as the Sun Belt championship game goes. Texas State's got a lot of upside, though. We'll see. The only thing I worry is a young coach now playing with expectations on a program that typically hasn't had expectations. That would be my one hang-up there. But let's go back to the best bet, though. I said I'd come back to this team. We're going back to Old Dominion, and it's not going to be a positive outlook. It's a negative outlook. If you forgot from what I talked about 35, 40 minutes ago, don't like what I see here. This is a team that doesn't have a lot of returning production like most teams in the Sun Belt. The problem is, as far as value goes, their best player by far is coming off an ACL injury. Is he going to be 100%? That's a significant question that I'm not sure is going to be fully answered until fall camp. And with a team that I thought was fortunate to get to a bowl game last year, they literally scored a touchdown on the last play of the final game of the regular season to get to a bowl game. I don't see it this year with a bunch of their playmakers gone. And then most importantly, why we're going under 4.5. We'll call it even money because there's a couple of even monies out there in the marketplace. There's a couple of 110s. And again, if you can get it, if you're one of the first to get after it at DraftKings, we can go under 5 here. But we'll officially grade it at under 4.5 wins. But again, 5's available at DraftKings. Let's go under 4.5 wins on Old Dominion. Most importantly, let's look at schedule. I only have them favored in 2 games this year. Home games against Georgia Southern and Marshall. And both of those favorite rolls are less than a field goal. Now, I get it. You just can't say, well, I mean, you only got them favored in 2 games, 2-10. No, but if you take those the winning percentages based off the lines, I think the most positive outlook for Old Dominion this year is 4-8. I do not see them getting to 5 wins. South Carolina, East Carolina, Virginia Tech, Bowling Green in the non-conference, 1-3 at best. Most likely, I think it's 0-4 in the non-conference. And then they play in that tougher division in the Sun Belt, and they pull Texas State and Arkansas State, 2 bowl teams from the West, 10 bowl teams from last year, plus South Carolina, and then the other team that didn't make a bowl, East Carolina. I think, look at their win total, 6.5. I think that's one of the most improved teams in the country. Just don't see it. It's one of the toughest schedules at the G5 level with a team that doesn't have much coming back. I do not see it for Old Dominion this year, and their best player possibly not 100% at linebacker. We are going under, once again, under 4.5 wins. We'll call it even money. So you don't have to lay a lot of juice on this one, guys, this week. That's not always the case with these win totals. Under 4.5 with a win total under 4.5 wins on Old Dominion. That'll do it for your best bet, and that'll do it for the podcast. And then we got one more next week. We're talking American. It'll just be me. And then we can welcome in the guys, Todd Fuhrman, Payne Insider, just 2 weeks away from hearing those beautiful voices. Speaking of beautiful voices, I'm going to shut mine down. I need a sip of water. We'll talk to you guys. Enjoy your week. We'll talk to you next week.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.